What's up, everybody? Welcome to the very first episode of the Optimizer's Anvil, part of the Arcanist Forge Network. My name is Ark, and in this series, I'm going to be taking you along for in-depth looks at D&D character builds. The goal of each of these videos is to create a very optimized character, so they're gonna err on the side of math and numbers. However, I'm also going to strive to breathe life into every one of these characters. A D&D character is nothing without a cool story. For this inaugural episode, we're going to be taking a look at my very favorite D&D build, the 14 Deaths Assassin. This is a fantastic Nova build that focuses on putting out a significant number of attacks in a single round against a surprise foe to deal an incredible amount of damage. It's also geared around resetting most of its resources in a short rest, so you can Nova often without worrying too much about burning out your character. Now, before we begin, this is an S tier build, like very, very strong. Talk to your DMs before building it and make sure they understand its damage benchmarks and make sure that they are willing to accommodate that kind of build in their game. Some DMs will relish the challenge of dealing with a very, very strong character. Others are gonna think it's a nightmare. It's always important when you're building a character, whether it's intentionally made to be a weaker character or a stronger character, that it fits the type of game that your DM wants to run and the other players at your table want to play. However, at the end of the video, I will have some tips and tricks for DMing around builds like this, so stay tuned if you think one of your players is going to use this build and you're not sure how to deal with it. With all that said, let's jump into the 14 Deaths Assassin. First off, we need to pick our race, and for this build there can really only be one option, and it's the Bugbear. Like I said, this build focuses on attacking our foes many times before they can react, and the Bugbear excels at that due to some of their features. The updated Bugbear in Monsters of the Multiverse has the special ability Surprise Attack, which allows you to do 2d6 extra damage against any foes that have not yet taken their turn in combat. This is an absolutely bonkers ability, and it's one that you're going to get a ton of value out of all the way through your career with this character. Additionally, you're going to get some cool quality of life things. You'll get sneaky, you'll get dark vision, and you'll gain the ability to hit people who are a little bit farther away from you, which will probably come into play at some really early levels. Also, because we're going to be taking a bunch of Warlock levels, I just love the idea of a sneaky Bugbear witch lurking through the swamps and
slaying their foes with dark energy.
It really gets the imagination pumping for what kind of personality this character would have. Stat-wise, we're going to want to prioritize Charisma, Dexterity, and Constitution. Going into level 1, as with many caster builds, ironically, our first level is going to be in Fighter. Casters get a lot out of a fighter start. We get proficiency in con saves, which allows us to focus better on our concentration spells. We get a slew of armor proficiencies. We also get a fighting style. We're gonna take defensive to boost our armor just a little bit. And we get second wind, which does come into play more often than you'd think. Storyline-wise, I like to think that your primal patron desires you to prove your knack for bloodshed before they grant you any of their otherworldly powers. As far as weapons go, we're going to pick up 2 short swords. Remember, our guiding star for damage with this build is to attack as many times as possible, and that's as true at level 1 as it is at 20. And at level 1, if you get the jump on somebody and can add 2d6 damage to 2 separate attacks, that's kind of a lot of damage at level 1 for an overround. However, we do get much more powerful at level 2 when we pick up our second and final level of Fighter. This level gives us the first cornerstone of our build, and that is Action Surge. This allows us to perform 2 attacks in a single round, and it resets on a short rest, which, like I said, is going to be important for this build. Now, if you manage to move before an enemy, you're going to get 3 attacks, 2 of which are going to do 3d6 damage plus your dex, and 1 of which will only do 3d6 damage. On an armor 10 opponent, you're going to wallop in for 30 damage. And against an armor 15, you're still going to smash through for 21. This is an absolutely massive hit for level 2 and a great start to our career as a first round killer. Next, and I agonized over this choice for a long time, we're going to start taking our Warlock levels. You could choose to start taking Rogue levels here, and that would be a 100% legitimate choice, but I think because Warlock is kind of the core of the story of our build, it's cooler to go into that first, and also gives you just a touch more damage. You do, however, lose out on a little bit of combat utility and other useful things that low-level Rogue gives you. For level 3, which will be our Warlock level 1, we're going to take the Genie Patron, more specifically the Ifrit. Now, many of you are probably saying,
"But Ark, why don't I go Hexblade? You said we're going to attack a lot of times, right? Don't I want to add my proficiency modifier to all of those attacks?"
and you'd be right. At level 20, going Hexblade would add roughly 70 damage to your Nova round, pushing you well over 700 damage, which is a lot. But you lose out on a great deal of utility, particularly late game. Also, when we're talking numbers this big, like we are with this build, 700 damage is really virtually the same as 650. In a practical game of Dungeons & Dragons, you're just not gonna have to do that much damage in a single round, almost ever. Because you lose out on utility, and only further increase your already incredibly high damage, Hexblade seems like a bit of a win more to me. What Genie gives us that is most important to our build is early game access to the Scorching Ray spell, which is where a lot of our damage is going to come from. It also gives us Bottled Respite, which allows us to enter our Genie's bottle, which is a tiny object that we can see out of and hear out of. This is a miraculously useful tool for any assassin character, but more importantly, it's an incredible tool for any class that relies on short resting. Some examples of how this will be very useful in your career are, say you need to kill somebody on the second story of a building. Well, you can get in your bottle and have an athletic party member huck you through the window, and all of a sudden you're on the second story without having to break through any locks. Say you are running away from a group of enemies that you don't think you can take, and you find yourself pushed up against a cliff. Well, get in your bottle and just roll down the cliff. You'll be fine, and you can just pop out at the bottom. Say you need to assassinate a target in broad daylight. Well, you can Nova that bastard and then run around a corner and poof into your bottle. All of a sudden, you're just a piece of trash on the street that the authorities will probably look over and your companions can pick up later. The possibilities are endless. However, more often than not, you're going to be using this ability while your companions are traveling. While they're covering distance, you can get in your bottle and one of them can pick you up, and you can take a short rest while they're walking. This means you're going to be able to use your Warlock spell slots and your Action Surge a lot more frivolously than other Warlocks would be able to do. And that freedom is always incredibly valuable in a build and makes a build a lot more fun to play. Lastly, at Warlock 1, we're going to want to pick up Hex. This is going to be your default if you screw up your Nova round or aren't able to get one. Just Hex somebody and just kind of default back to being an okay damage per round character. At level 4, we're gonna go Warlock 2, and we get Invocations. I would pick up Devil's Sight and Agonizing Blast. We're not gonna use Agonizing Blast just yet, but we're gonna wanna have it prepped for later. At level 5, Warlock 3, we're going to get our first major damage boost in the form of access to Scorching Ray and a second Eldritch Blast. Outside of our Nova round, Eldritch Blast is going to replace melee combat, so we can go ahead and drop our weapons and pick up a shield, which will give us a really nice boost in armor. In our Nova round, our combo has changed to this: Action Surge, double Scorching Ray. Due to the range of Scorching Ray, it's actually fairly easy to snipe opponents from a position where they can't see you, so preferably do this out of sight to give yourself advantage on your Nova attacks. With this combo, we're going to be shooting out 6 Scorching Rays, each of which deals 2d6 damage and an additional 2d6 damage because of our Bugbear Surprise attack. This means we're going to be pumping out 24 d6 damage if all of our attacks hit. Against an armor 10 opponent, we're going to be dealing 79 to 93 damage, depending on if we were able to get advantage or not. Against an armor 15 target, we'll be dealing 82 damage if we have advantage, all the way down to 53 if we don't. This is an absolute freight train of damage for a level 5 character, and you can do it once a short rest. Additionally, boy, this is a huge level for us, we get our Pact boon. For this, I heavily recommend Pact of the Chain and taking an Imp. This little fellow is going to be insanely useful to you for a variety of reasons. The first is you're going to prostrate yourself on the ground and implore your DM to give you a Wand of Magic Missiles. A Wand of Magic Missiles is a great tool on an Imp because they can use it without breaking their invisibility, which will significantly increase your DPR in your non-Nova rounds. Also, don't forget to give your imp a healing potion, so if you get knocked unconscious, it can revive you. Also, your fiendish friend is going to be just like the best companion for scouting you can possibly imagine. It's invisible, it's got devil's sight, it can fly, it can really do all of the reconnaissance you need to get off a reliable nova more often. You'll have forewarning because it'll be able to be your eyes in the sky. It's just useful for so many situations. And the final and more genie-specific reason this is such a great companion is that you can hop in your bottle, your imp can pick up the bottle, and then turn invisible. You literally have an invisible flying mount at level 5. That's super duper cool and so useful. At level 6, we're going to go Warlock 4 and get our first ASI, which we're going to trade out for the Alert feat. Now, I know the Alert feat is like a super boring feat, but you rely on going before your enemies. So having +5 to your initiative is insanely useful. I kind of view it as the bugbear tax, and it's 100% worth it. At level 7, we go Warlock 5, which gives us a boost to our Scorching Ray and gives us access to the wonderful spell Spirit Shroud. But because of the range constraints of Spirit Shroud and the fact that we can reliably get advantage with Scorching Ray, we're gonna stick to Scorching Ray for now and save Spirit Shroud for later. With this boost against an armor 15 opponent, we're going to be dealing 76 to 108 damage, give or take advantage. And against an armor 10 opponent, which are probably going to be becoming a little bit more rare at this point in the game, we're going to be punching in for 104 to 123 damage. At level 8, we're going to be taking our first level of Rogue. You get sneak attack, which we're not really going to be using because we deal spell damage most of the time, but you also get expertise, which I heavily recommend putting into perception and stealth. You want these abilities because your whole bread and butter is noticing enemies before they notice you and attacking them before they attack you. So these two skills are really just a no-brainer to make that happen more often. At level 9, we're going to go Rogue 2 and we get Cunning Action. This is super useful for us because outside of our Nova round, we're gonna be doing a lot of darting around, especially once we get Spirit Shroud up into our rotation. And being able to dash as a bonus action and more importantly, disengage as a bonus action is really going to be helpful. At level 10, which I feel like should be a big level in any character build, we get a humongous damage boost. We go Rogue 3 and take the Assassin subclass. This is going to grant us advantage on any opponent who has not yet moved in combat, which is going to be very useful because it means we can be less reliant on sniping with Scorching Ray. More importantly, however, against surprised opponents, we automatically crit. This is mad for this build. Now, it's important to note for older players who maybe are coming from 3.5, there's no such thing as a surprise round anymore. Surprise is a condition that a foe has on their first turn of combat in which they are surprised. This means that they can go in combat even though they're surprised, they just can't do anything. This can screw up your combo because you still have to go before them even when they're surprised. It's just a little thing that you need to remember, and it's why the Alert feat is so important. So, all of a sudden, all of our attacks crit. What does this mean to us? This means our Bugbear Surprise Attack crits, our Spirit Shroud crits, our Eldritch Blast damage crits, and our Scorching Ray damage crits, which is a ton of numbers. Damage-wise, we basically just became a raid boss, but I'm going to hold off on doing a damage calculation until next level because it's another big damage boost right in a row. So at level 11, the dark magics that we've been absorbing for our patron are going to start rubbing off on us, and we're going to become a magical being in our own right by taking our first level of Sorcerer. For a Sorceress lineage, we could literally take any type of Sorcerer and be pretty happy, but I think Divine Soul has just a little bit of an edge. The Favored by the Gods ability can help a little bit if some of your Nova round damage goes wide, and access to healing spells are nice. Also, I think it's kind of cool to imagine how an Ifrit patron Warlock would heal. I assume it's like a lot of like really painful like cauterizing flames that like burst out of their hands and kind of heal your wounds in like a torturous way. For spells, we're going to take Shield and Healing Word just because they're incredible spells. However, if your DM allows it, Gift of Alacrity is the absolute GOAT of level 1 spells for this build. So you can replace one of those with that if your DM allows it in their games. Having Gift of Alacrity up with your high dexterity and the alert feat makes you pretty much guaranteed to go first in combat, which is exactly what you want. Now, Sorcerer 1 is not the big damage boost that I promised. Rather, we just hit level 11, so our Eldritch Blast hits 3 times instead of 2. This marks an important shift in our Nova combo to favor Spirit Shroud over Scorching Ray. Our combo becomes this. In our prep round, we need to set up Spirit Shroud. Then, in the first round of combat, we hit them with an Eldritch Blast and Action Surge to use our last spell slot on a Scorching Ray. With Spirit Shroud active, we're going to do an extra 1d8 damage on all of our attacks, which obviously crit, making it 2d8. Now, just remember that you've all of a sudden became kind of like a melee assassin because you have to attack from 10 feet away. So where that's not possible, default back to double Scorching Ray. This is where we're getting into some really impressive numbers. On an armor 10 opponent, we're going to be dealing 261 damage on average. That's an absurd amount of damage for level 11. Against an armor 15 target, we're still going to be doing 231 damage. And on armor 19 targets, we're still going to be breaking through for 184 damage. We're gaining on 300 damage at level 11. And the nice thing about this build is it doesn't stop getting stronger there. We still have a lot of mountain to climb before we reach the summit of Mount Nova. Moving forward, at level 12, we're going to go Sorcerer 2. This gives us Font of Magic, which is fairly useful, although unlike a coffee lock, we're probably going to be converting spell slots into sorcery points, so later on we can use Quicken Spell more often. And at level 13, we're going to get Quicken Spell because we're going to take Sorcerer 3. Quicken Spell unlocks the final form of our Nova combo, and it is a doozy. Now, before we get too far into it, I just do like to make a note that there is some bickering on forums on how Action Surge interacts with Quicken Spell, but according to Jeremy Crawford, who I don't think is necessarily like 100% official, but it's the best that we have, you can Action Surge, cast 2 cantrips, and then Quicken Spell a leveled spell. So at most tables, this shouldn't be an issue. I'm sure there's somebody who doesn't think that's the case, but I think those people are probably pretty rare. Okay, with that said, let's break down this juicy supernova. Provided all of these attacks hit, you're going to be hitting 10 times. Against an armor 10 opponent, you are now hitting for 374 damage. Woo! That's a lot of damage! You just gained 100 damage in 2 levels, which is pretty nuts. Against an armor 15 opponent, you're still going to be doing 341 damage, and against an armor 19 opponent, you're gonna drop all the way down to 282 damage, which is still a pretty hefty chunk of change. Going into our next levels, we have a choice between increasing our utility as a character and kind of increasing our damage and also kind of leaning into the archetype of the Warlock. If you want to focus on increasing your utility, you can go all the way to Sorcerer 5. This will give you access to the spell Catnap, which is really useful for any class that relies on short rests. Especially for you, because you can essentially now hop into your bottle, get into one of your friend's pockets, and 15 minutes later, hop out completely reset and ready to Nova again. However, if you choose to go the Warlock route, which is the route I'm going to follow, you do end up getting more damage and just some cooler stuff more quickly. And also you're just more on theme for what your character wants to be. So I think that's the way I'm gonna go. So at this point, we're going to jump back into the Warlock class and ride it all the way until we're Warlock level 10. At Warlock 6, we gain our second Genie ability, which will give us the ability to fly without using our concentration, which is really useful for a number of reasons. The first is that we can attack with our Spirit Shroud while 10 feet above somebody, which makes us a little bit safer in skirmishing. And also, we can now kind of like fly around while we're stealthing, which should make being stealthy a little bit easier in a number of situations. At level 7, we get a small bump in damage from our Warlock spell slots going up a level, so we can upcast our Scorching Ray even further. At level 8, we get an ASI, which I think we really want to put into Charisma at this point. We're already a little bit behind on raw stats, and now it's time to play a little bit of catch up. And at level 9, we finally become the namesake of our build, the 14 Death's Assassin. Our Eldritch Blast now hits 4 times, meaning we're going to hit 8 Eldritch Blasts and 6 Scorching Rays in our Nova combo, meaning we hit a total of 14 times. See? The name was gonna make sense all along. You doubted me, but it was gonna make sense. Additionally, we can now upcast our Spirit Shroud to level 5, meaning we now get 2d8 damage per attack from it, which will obviously crit to 4d8, which times 14 is a nutso amount of damage. Are you ready for the big numbers? Against an armored 19 opponent, we're going to be doing 554 damage. Against an armor 15 opponent, we're going to be dealing 631. And against an armor 10 opponent, we're going to be doing 656 damage.
Woo! That's a lot of damage!
You have truly become the ultimate assassin, capable of killing almost anything in the game before it even gets a chance to react. And over the next couple levels, we're going to gain the ability to do it over and over again reliably. At Warlock 10, we gain Sanctuary Vessel, which is going to allow us to invite some friends into our bottle as well, which can be useful. But more importantly, it's going to allow us to take a short rest while in the bottle in 10 minutes. This is an excellent little quick reset for after you've used a lot of resources in an overround. And going into level 19 and 20, we're going to finish out our Sorcerer levels. At 19, we're going to get an ASI, which will allow us to boost our Charisma all the way up to 20. While this isn't a huge boost in damage, it does give us our final damage numbers. Against an armor 19 opponent, we're going to pump out 558 damage. Against an armor 15 opponent, we're going to deal 651 damage. And against an armor 10, we're going to deal 664 damage. And at level 20, we get access to Catnap, which is going to give us just a whole bunch of really quick resets on our short rest driven payload, which can pretty much destroy anything in its path. I simply can't tell you how much I love this build. It's super fun to play, particularly because of how reliant it is on surprising your opponents. Yes, it's a very strong build, but you have to exercise a great deal of caution and care as a player in order to put yourself in situations where that strength can come to bear. And it's the requirement for this care that I really don't think that DMs have to worry too much about this build. It's the same as a regular Assassin Rogue, which can put out like a little bit like 400 to 450 damage in a round. And so really only 200 more above that, and what is 200 damage really when you're already putting out 400? Essentially, this build is just really good at doing what it does, which is killing things before they strike back. But because you have cunning action and some levels in fighter, you feel a little bit more versatile than a class that would only be good at just doing that. You can hold your own in a protracted fight if you have to, and you're particularly good at avoiding death because you're so mobile. That being said, this build is obviously strong, and I don't expect every DM to be on board with you playing it in their game. DMing against this kind of damage can be difficult, and it's something that you should talk to about your DM in advance so they know how to prepare for it. If you are a DM running a lower powered campaign and you have a player who wants to play this build, I do have some recommendations for dealing with it. The first and most obvious thing you can do is just ban Bugbear. I don't necessarily recommend this, although I have played this build as an elf as opposed to a Bugbear. The problem with it is that the function of Bugbear in this build, while it does add a lot of damage, is really to smooth out the level progression of the build. Because you're a Bugbear, you get early Nova rounds, so you can kind of be in the spirit of the character that you're playing right from the get-go, and I think that's really, really valuable in any build because it just makes you feel like you're consistent and your character plays how it should the entire game, as opposed to having kind of like weird character breaks where all of a sudden they're really good at one thing that they haven't been able to do before. Bugbear also makes this build a lot more fun to play if you screw up your Nova round, or if you're caught by surprise, or if you're just out of resources. It makes you still viable rather than just kind of like a wet noodle. So rather than banning Bugbear, I would recommend building checks and balances to this class into your actual world. I would run a lot of enemies that have resistance to force or fire damage. Not all of your enemies should be, but a good enough portion of them should be that your Warlock is going to have to think about who they Nova and when they Nova and how they Nova. Put a lot of lore elements in your game that is going to teach your assassin character which characters are resistant to the damage that they're going to try to use. This is going to draw them into the lore of the world, because in order to be an effective assassin, they're going to need to know how to attack their opponents. Sometimes they're not going to be able to double Scorching Ray, and instead they're going to have to Eldritch Blast. Sometimes it's going to be the opposite. They're going to have to kind of get into the mind of a killer and figure out the best ways to slay their foes, which is a much more engaging experience than arbitrarily nerfing someone. Also, what DM doesn't love it when a character is actively asking about their world in order to better interact with it? Additionally, don't run bosses that can be easily trivialized by large bursts of damage. Instead, take a hint from video games and give your bosses multiple health bars and phases. This is a great way to allow your assassin to feel powerful and cool and useful to the group, while also allowing the group to take over and feel powerful and cool once the assassin is burnt out. This will make what can sometimes feel like a lone wolf character feel useful and important to a group, and will illustrate mechanically to your players in an in-game way why it's important to have burst damage and also important to have sustained damage. Well, that's all I have to say about the 14 Deaths Assassin. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed producing it. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts about this build in the comments, and please, if you decide to try it out, drop a comment below and tell me about your experiences with it. Additionally, I would love for you to subscribe to this channel, and if you want to support me making content in the future, I would love for you to check out my Patreon page. Thank you all so much for watching, and keep forging on. See what I did there? Arcanist Forge, forging on.